I found the letter 3 days after we buried her. It was November, and the first snow was already falling, fat, wet flakes that clung to the windows like they were trying to get in. I was alone in her house, that small ranch-style place she'd lived in for 37 years, packing up a lifetime into cardboard boxes that smelled like the basement of the hardware store. My mother had been sick for 8 months, pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't negotiate, doesn't give you false hope, doesn't pretend you might beat it with enough positive thinking and green smoothies. She knew from the beginning what was coming, and she faced it the way she'd faced everything else in her life, quietly, with her shoulders back and her mouth shut about the things that really hurt. We'd never been the kind of mother and daughter you see in commercials. No matching pajamas at Christmas, no long heart-to-hearts over wine. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 4, and she did it with the grim efficiency of someone who'd learned early that the world doesn't owe you tenderness. I grew up watching her work double shifts at the hospital, come home smelling like disinfectant and exhaustion, and still managed to get dinner on the table by 7. She taught me to be strong. She taught me to be independent. What she didn't teach me was how to be close. So when I found that letter, tucked inside her recipe box, the one place I never would have looked if I hadn't been searching for her famous pumpkin bread recipe to make one last time, my hands actually shook as I picked it up. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive-looking, not like her at all. My name was written on the front in her careful handwriting, Catherine. Just that. No "to my daughter" or "my dearest girl." Just my name, stark and simple, the way she'd called to me across the house when dinner was ready. I didn't open it right away. I stood there in her kitchen, surrounded by boxes half filled with her dishes, her cookbooks, her life, and I felt something crack open inside my chest, because the envelope was sealed. She'd written me a letter and never given it to me, had meant for me to find it only after she was gone, only after there was no chance left to ask her what she meant, to tell her I didn't understand, to hear her voice explain the things she'd never said out loud. I sat down at her kitchen table, the one we'd eaten at in silence 1,000 times, and I opened it. What I read in those first lines, it changed everything I thought I knew about my mother, about my childhood, about the woman who raised me with such fierce, lonely determination. And it was only the beginning.
The letter was dated October 15th, 3 weeks before she died. Her handwriting was shakier than on the envelope, like she'd written it on one of the bad days, when the pain made everything harder. "Catherine," it began, "I'm writing this because I've never been good at saying things out loud. Your whole life, I've watched you think I didn't love you enough. I saw it in your eyes when you were 12 and came home crying about that boy who called you names, and I told you to toughen up instead of holding you. I saw it when you graduated college and looked for me in the crowd, and I was there, but I didn't run to you with flowers and tears like the other mothers. I saw it 2 months ago when the doctor told me I had 6 months at most, and you said, 'Okay,' in that flat voice you use when you're trying not to need anything from anyone. You learned that from me. I'm sorry for that." I had to stop reading. My vision blurred, and I pressed my palms against my eyes, hard, the way she used to do when she was tired. I could hear her voice in every word, that careful, measured tone she used for important things. I kept reading. "There's something I never told you about your father. You know he left when you were 4. What you don't know is why. What you don't know is what happened before that, and what I did about it." My heart started beating faster. In 50 years, my mother had told me almost nothing about my father. His name was Richard. He'd been a salesman. He left one Tuesday morning and never came back. That was it. That was the entire story of my origins, as far as I knew. When I'd asked questions as a child, she'd shut them down with a look that could freeze water. Eventually, I stopped asking. "Your father didn't just leave," the letter continued. "I made him leave, and I made sure he could never come back." The words seemed to pulse on the page. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, and the house was so quiet I could hear the furnace clicking on in the basement. I thought about my mother, dying, choosing to tell me this now when I couldn't ask her anything, couldn't demand explanations. Was that cruelty or kindness? I still don't know. "When you were 3 years old, I found out your father had another family, a wife, 2 children. They lived 1 town over in Millbrook. He'd been married to her for 12 years. You weren't his secret. They were. Or maybe both were. I don't know how he managed it, the logistics of living 2 lives, but he did it for over 3 years." I felt sick, not because I cared about a man I couldn't even remember, but because of what this meant about the architecture of my childhood. Everything I thought was one thing had actually been another. But there was more. There was so much more. And what my mother told me next made me understand why she'd sealed this letter, why she'd hidden it away, why she'd waited until death had made her unreachable before letting me know the truth. Because what she did when she found out about that other family, it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't what anyone would expect. And it explained everything about the woman who raised me and nothing at all.
"I didn't confront him," the letter went on. "I didn't cry or scream or throw his things out on the lawn. I did something else. Something I've never regretted. Not even now, not even facing God or whatever comes next. But something you need to know about because it's shaped your entire life, and you deserve to understand why I was the way I was." I pulled my cardigan tighter around myself. The house felt colder, or maybe it was just me. I hired a private investigator first. I needed to know everything. His other wife's name was Susan. His children were named Michael and Jennifer. Michael was 8, Jennifer was 6. They lived in a white colonial on Maple Street. He told them he was a regional sales manager who traveled 3 days a week. He told me he worked local routes Monday through Wednesday. The math was perfect. We were both his part-time families, pieced together into one full-time lie. I tried to imagine my mother sitting across from a private investigator, asking questions in that cool, composed way she had. I could see it perfectly. She would have been methodical, thorough. She wouldn't have fallen apart. That wasn't her way. "I watched them," she wrote. "I'm not proud of this, but I watched that family for 2 weeks. I sat in my car outside their house. I saw Susan bring the children home from school. I saw them eat dinner together through their dining room window. I saw your father kiss his other wife goodnight. And Catherine, here's what I realized. They had no idea. Susan thought she had a faithful husband who worked hard and came home to her 4 nights a week. Those children thought they had a normal father. They were innocent." My throat was tight. I thought about my mother, 26 years old, watching through a car window as her husband lived a completely separate life. What must that have done to her? "So I made a choice," the letter continued, and I could feel the weight of what was coming. I could destroy that family, tell Susan everything, blow up those children's lives, make sure everyone suffered as much as I was suffering. Or I could do something different, something that would protect you, protect them, and make sure your father paid a price that actually mattered. I stood up, walked to the window. The snow was really coming down now, covering the brown grass of her small backyard, making everything white and clean and new. I wasn't sure I wanted to keep reading, but I had to. I went to him one night when he was home with us. You were asleep upstairs. I told him I knew everything. I told him I had photographs, documents, receipts. I told him I could destroy his other life with one phone call. And then I told him what he was going to do instead. What had she demanded? Money? A divorce? What kind of deal had my mother made with this man? He was going to disappear completely from both families. That was the deal. He would tell Susan he'd been offered a job overseas, something that required him to leave immediately, something dangerous that meant no contact for at least a year. He would leave her enough money to be comfortable, and then he would vanish. New city, new name, new life. Alone. He would never contact any of us again. Not you, not me, not Susan, not his other children. He would lose all of us. That was his punishment. I sat back down, my legs weak. This was not what I'd expected, not at all. But there was still more, and what came next would explain everything.
You want to know why I chose that? The letter continued. And I realized my mother had anticipated every question I'd have, the way she always could read me, even when I thought I was unreadable. I chose it because I looked at those children through that window, and I looked at you sleeping in your bed, and I realized something. The truth would destroy 3 children who'd done nothing wrong. Susan's kids would learn their father was a liar and a bigamist. You would grow up knowing you were the secret family, the shameful one, the mistake he tried to hide. All 3 of you would carry that for the rest of your lives. I thought about being 4 years old, trying to understand that kind of betrayal. She was right. It would have broken something in me. But if he just disappeared, she wrote, if he just became a man who left, then you could all grow up with a simpler story. Sad, but simple. A father who wasn't strong enough to stay. Not a father who lied to everyone, who built a life on deception, who made children he never really committed to. Do you see the difference, Catherine? One story makes you question everything about yourself. The other just makes you sad. My hands were trembling now, because I did see it. I'd spent my whole life thinking my father was weak, thinking he'd just walked away because he couldn't handle responsibility. It had made me angry, but it hadn't made me feel like I was fundamentally wrong somehow, fundamentally unlovable. She'd protected me from that. I gave him 72 hours, the letter went on. He moved to Oregon, changed his name to David Mills. I kept track of him for the first 5 years, just to make sure he honored the agreement. He did. He got a job selling insurance. He lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. He never married again, never had more children. He kept his word. Or maybe he was just too broken to rebuild. I don't know. I stopped checking after that. Oregon. All this time, my father had been alive in Oregon, living under a different name, completely alone. The enormity of it washed over me. Susan told people her husband died overseas, my mother's letter explained. I saw his obituary in the Millbrook paper 6 months after he left. Some kind of industrial accident in Singapore. Very tragic. Body never recovered. I don't know if he helped her create that story or if she did it herself. Either way, her children got to grieve a hero instead of hating a coward. I thought that was good. Jesus, my mother had orchestrated all of this. She'd been 26 years old, and she'd played chess with people's lives like she was twice that age. You want to know why I was hard on you, she wrote, and my breath caught because, yes, that was exactly what I wanted to know. It's because I was terrified of you turning out weak, terrified of you needing a man the way I'd needed your father. I'd built my entire life around him. I'd ignored red flags, the business trips that seemed inconsistent, the way he never wanted me to meet his colleagues, the phone calls he took outside.
I'd ignored all of it because I loved him, and I thought love was enough. I could feel tears on my face now, hot and sudden. So I raised you to be steel, the letter continued. I raised you to never need anyone the way I needed him, and I succeeded. Look at you, Catherine, 50 years old, successful, independent, strong. You've never let a man define you. You've never been anyone's fool. I'm proud of that. But, there was that word, but, the word that changes everything. But, I also made you lonely. I see it. You keep people at arm's length. You don't let anyone close enough to hurt you, which means you don't let anyone close enough to love you properly either. You're alone, and it's my fault. I turned you into me. I was crying hard now, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and old and never touched, because she was right. I'd had relationships, but I'd never really let anyone in. I'd always kept an exit route, always held something back, and I'd told myself it was strength, but maybe it had just been fear all along. There's more you need to know, the letter said, and I almost laughed through my tears because of course there was more. About what happened after your father left, about what I did next, and about the real reason I'm telling you all of this now. I looked at the pages left in my hand. 4 more. 4 more pages of secrets my mother had carried for 46 years. What else could there possibly be? But I was about to find out, and what she told me next made everything before it seem almost simple by comparison. 3 months after your father left, the letter continued, Susan contacted me. I stopped breathing. How? How had Susan even known about us? She found a photograph, my mother explained, in a box of your father's things he'd left behind, probably accidentally. It was of you, Catherine. You were maybe 2 years old, sitting on his lap at a park. On the back, he'd written your name and the date. Susan wasn't stupid. She did the math. She realized he'd had you while he was married to her. Oh, God, so the other wife had known. All this time, I thought my mother's plan had worked perfectly, but Susan had found out anyway. She showed up at our house on a Tuesday afternoon. You were at preschool. I remember opening the door and seeing her there, this blonde woman in a blue dress, and I knew immediately who she was. I'd stared at her enough through a car window. She said, I think we need to talk about Richard. That's what she called him. Richard. The same name I'd called him. He hadn't even bothered to use different names with his different families. I tried to imagine that moment, the 2 women my father had betrayed, face to face in a doorway. I let her in, the letter said, made her coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one you're probably sitting at now, and we talked for 4 hours. She told me her version of events, the mysterious job overseas, the rushed goodbye, the letters that never came. She told me she'd mourned him for 3 months before finding that photograph. She told me how angry she was, how betrayed, not just by what he'd done, but by the fact that he'd robbed her of the chance to confront him, to scream at him, to make him answer for what he'd done. My mother had taken that from her. The deal she'd made with my father had protected Susan's children, but it had also stolen Susan's closure. And then she asked me a question, my mother wrote. She asked if I'd known about her, if I'd been complicit in the deception. Catherine, I had a choice in that moment. I could tell her the truth, that I'd found out and engineered his disappearance, or I could lie. And I lied. I closed my eyes. Of course she had. I told her I'd been just as deceived as she was, the letter explained. I told her he'd left me too, suddenly, with no explanation, just packed a bag one day and vanished. I let her think we were both his victims, abandoned in the same cruel way. And she believed me. We cried together that afternoon. Two women who'd loved the same terrible man. Two women who'd been left behind. It was brilliant in its way. Cruel, maybe, but brilliant. We became friends, my mother wrote, and this shocked me more than anything else so far. We met for coffee once a month. We'd talk about raising our children alone, about the struggles of single motherhood, about the men we dated afterward, though neither of us ever remarried. We helped each other, Catherine. When her son Michael broke his arm and she couldn't afford the hospital bill, I lent her money. When my car died and I needed rides to work for a week, she drove me. We were connected by the same wound. My mother had maintained a friendship with my father's other wife for years, all while hiding the truth about what she'd done. The deception was staggering. This went on for 11 years, until her daughter Jennifer turned 17, and then everything fell apart in a way I never could have predicted. I felt my stomach drop. What happened when Jennifer turned 17? What could have happened that ended an 11-year friendship built on shared betrayal and secret lies? Jennifer ran away from home, my mother wrote. She left Susan a note saying she'd gone to find her father, said she'd done research, traced him somehow. Susan was frantic. She called me sobbing, asking if I knew anything, if I'd heard from Richard, if there was any way to find Jennifer before she got hurt. No, no, no. I knew exactly where Jennifer was going, Oregon. Somehow that girl had figured out what I'd figured out years before, that her father wasn't dead at all, that he'd just disappeared, and she was going to confront him.
I had two choices, my mother wrote. I could tell Susan the truth, that I'd known all along where Richard was, that I'd orchestrated his disappearance, that I'd lied to her for 11 years. Or I could help her find Jennifer without revealing any of that. I chose the latter. I told Susan I had contacts from the hospital, people who could make calls, track someone down. I said I'd help her locate Jennifer, but she had to trust me. I could see my mother making those calculations, always 3 steps ahead, always protecting her secrets even when it meant digging herself deeper. I called your father, the letter continued, and I realized she'd maintained contact with him all those years, despite the deal. I told him his daughter was coming. I told him he needed to handle it carefully. He had to convince Jennifer to go home without telling her anything that would lead back to me, back to the truth about what really happened. He was terrified, Catherine. I could hear it in his voice. Terrified of that girl, of what she might ask, of what he might have to explain. I thought about Jennifer, 17 years old, angry and brave enough to track down the father she thought was dead. What had she been expecting to find? Jennifer found him working at an insurance office in Portland, my mother wrote. She walked right up to him in the parking lot and said, "You are my father." She told me this later, told me everything, actually. Your father, Richard, he broke down, started crying right there in the parking lot. He told her he'd made terrible mistakes. He told her he'd had to leave because he wasn't strong enough to be the father she deserved. He told her he thought about her and Michael every single day. The manipulation of it was breathtaking. My father lying to his daughter, even in that moment of confrontation. But Jennifer was smart, the letter said. She asked him why he'd changed his name, why David Mills instead of Richard Hartwell, why fake his death instead of just leaving. And your father, he couldn't answer that. He stumbled, he made excuses, and Jennifer, she knew something else was going on. I felt a strange kinship with this girl I'd never met, my half-sister.
We'd both been shaped by the same man's cowardice and our mother's secrets. She stayed in Portland for 3 days, my mother continued, following him, watching him, the way I'd once watched her family. She saw how he lived, alone, small, diminished. She saw that he wasn't hiding from danger or witness protection or anything dramatic. He was just hiding from his own choices. And on the 3rd day, she found something. In his apartment, there was a box. In that box were letters he'd never sent, some addressed to her and Michael, some addressed to you, Catherine. My heart stopped. Letters to me, from my father, letters I'd never received. Jennifer took them. She confronted him one more time, told him she knew he was a coward and a liar, told him she never wanted to see him again. And then she came home. But she didn't go straight to Susan. She came to me first. Oh no. She showed up on our door on a Saturday morning. You were 14 at a friend's house. Jennifer stood on my porch with that box of letters, and she said, "My father wrote letters to someone named Catherine, same last name as you. I think you need to explain some things." The secret was out. After 11 years of carefully constructed lies, a 17-year-old girl had unraveled everything.
"I could have lied again," my mother wrote. "I could have said I didn't know what she was talking about. But I looked at this girl, this brave, angry girl who'd tracked down her father across state lines, and I saw myself in her. So I told her the truth, all of it. The affair, the 2 families, the deal I'd made, the disappearance I'd orchestrated, everything." I could barely breathe. What had Jennifer done with that information? "She sat at this kitchen table and listened to the whole story," the letter said. "And when I finished, she asked me one question. She asked, 'Did you do it to protect us? Me and Michael and your daughter?' I told her yes. I told her the truth would have destroyed all 3 of you children, and I couldn't let that happen. And do you know what she said, Catherine?" I waited, reading the next line through tears. She said, "Thank you." She thanked me. This girl whose father I'd exiled, whose mother I'd lied to for 11 years, she thanked me because she understood. She understood that some secrets are kept not out of cowardice, but out of love. I had to stop reading. I stood up, walked to the sink, splashed cold water on my face. My whole life I'd thought I was alone, an only child raised by a hard mother who'd been abandoned by a weak father. But I'd had siblings, a brother and sister I'd never known, and one of them had known about me, had held my father's letters to me, had sat in this very kitchen and learned the truth. Jennifer and I made a deal that day, my mother's letter continued. She would keep my secret from Susan. She wouldn't tell her mother about me orchestrating Richard's disappearance, about the lies I'd told. In exchange, I would give you the letters your father wrote. I would let you decide whether you wanted to know about your brother and sister, whether you wanted to reach out to them. It would be your choice, not mine. I looked around the kitchen wildly. Where were the letters? Where had she put them? "But I never gave them to you," she wrote, and I felt betrayed all over again. I kept them. I told myself I was waiting for the right time, waiting until you were old enough to handle it. But the truth is, I was afraid you'd read those letters and see that your father loved you, that he thought about you, that he wanted to be in your life but couldn't because of the deal I'd made. I was afraid you'd blame me for keeping him away, for choosing the path I chose. She was right to be afraid, because I did blame her. Reading this now, knowing there were letters, I blamed her so much. Jennifer kept her promise, the letter said. She never told Susan. She went home and told her mother she'd found their father, that he was broken and pathetic, that he wasn't worth her anger anymore. Susan believed her. She stopped looking backward after that, started dating again. Eventually met a good man named Frank, who became a real father to Jennifer and Michael. They had a good life, Catherine. They're okay. But what about me? What about my life? Had I been okay? Jennifer and I stayed in contact over the years, my mother's letter wrote. Not often, a card at Christmas, an email on birthdays. She got married, had children. Michael became a teacher. They both turned out well, and every few years, Jennifer would ask me if I'd told you yet, if I'd given you those letters. And every time I said no, not yet, not yet. The betrayal was complete. My mother had maintained a relationship with my half-sister for decades while keeping me in the dark about everything, while letting me believe I was alone. So now you're asking yourself where the letters are, she wrote, and even in death she could read my mind. They're in the attic, in a blue metal box behind the Christmas decorations. There are 17 of them. Your father wrote you one letter every year on your birthday until you turned 21. Then he stopped. I don't know why he stopped. Maybe he gave up. Maybe he moved on. Maybe he died. I honestly don't know, Catherine. I stopped keeping track of him after Jennifer found him. 17 letters, 17 birthdays. My father had remembered me, had written to me, had thought about me growing up, and my mother had kept them all hidden. You're angry at me now, the letter continued. You should be. I've lied to you your whole life. But before you hate me completely, you need to know why I'm telling you this now, why I'm giving you all of this after I'm gone, when you can't yell at me or demand answers, or make me explain myself face to face. Why? Why had she done it this way? Because there's one more thing you need to know about Jennifer, about why this matters now, today, in ways it didn't matter before, and this is the part that's going to change everything again.
The attic was cold and smelled like old cardboard and dust. I pulled the string for the light, and a bare bulb flickered on, casting long shadows across boxes labeled in my mother's precise handwriting. Christmas, tax records, 1998-2005. Catherine, school papers. A whole life, organized and categorized, everything in its place. I found the blue metal box exactly where she said it would be, behind a plastic tub of ornaments. It was heavier than I expected. I carried it down the stairs carefully, like it might break, like it might explode, and set it on the kitchen table next to my mother's letter. For a long time, I just looked at it. This box had been up there my entire adult life. Every Christmas, when I'd helped her bring down decorations, I'd walked right past it. Every spring cleaning, every time we'd stored something new in the attic, it had been there, waiting. I opened it. The photograph was on top. Me and my father, just like she'd described. I was maybe 2 years old, wearing overalls and missing my front teeth. He was young, 28, 29, with dark hair and a smile that looked genuine. We were both looking at something to the left of the camera, both mid-laugh, mouths open, eyes bright. We looked connected, like we belonged to each other. I'd never seen a picture of my father before. My mother had removed every trace of him from the house after he left. But here he was, preserved in this secret box, this hidden archive of a life that might have been. Beneath the photograph were the letters, 17 of them, each in its own envelope, each marked with a year. Catherine, age 5. Catherine, age 11. Catherine, age 18. His handwriting was messy, slanted, nothing like my mother's careful script. I picked up the first one, age 5. My hands were trembling so badly I almost tore the envelope. Inside was a single page written on lined notebook paper. Dear Catherine, it began, you're 5 years old today. I wonder if you remember me at all. Probably not. You were so young when I left. I hope you don't remember. I hope it doesn't hurt you the way it hurts me. I'm living in a city where it rains all the time.
I work in an office and come home to an empty apartment and try not to think about what I gave up, what I lost. Your mother thinks I'm a coward. She's right. But I want you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Not leaving your mother, leaving you. I think about you every single day. I wonder what you look like now, if you're tall or short, if you're brave or shy, if you hate me yet. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I love you. Dad. I read it 3 times. Then I picked up the next letter, age 6, age 7, age 8. I read them all, one after another, tears streaming down my face in that quiet kitchen while the winter afternoon faded outside. Each letter was different, but the same. Updates about his lonely life in Oregon, questions about who I was becoming, apologies, so many apologies. And in every single one he told me he loved me, that he thought about me, that leaving me was his greatest regret. The last letter, written for my 21st birthday, was longer than the others. Dear Catherine, it said, this is the last letter I'll write to you, not because I'm giving up or because I've stopped loving you, but because you're an adult now and these letters have become something else. They're not for you anymore. They're for me. A way to pretend I'm still your father, a way to pretend I have the right to know you, to love you, to be part of your life. But I don't have that right. I gave it up when I made the deal with your mother, when I chose to disappear instead of fighting to stay. She was right to make me go. I see that now. I would have destroyed you, Catherine, you and your brother and sister. The lying, the deception, the constant juggling of 2 lives, it was only a matter of time before it all collapsed. Your mother saved you from that. She saved all of you. So this is goodbye. I hope you've had a good life. I hope your mother raised you to be strong and smart and better than me. I hope you never waste years loving the wrong person the way I did, the way I loved myself more than I loved any of you. Be happy, Catherine. That's all I want for you. Be happy. Love, Dad. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. Then I sat there in the growing darkness, not turning on lights, just sitting with the weight of it all. My father hadn't been a monster. He'd been weak and selfish and cowardly, but he'd loved me. In his broken way, he'd loved me. And my mother, with all her hardness and silence and walls, she'd loved me too, enough to make impossible choices, enough to carry terrible secrets, enough to protect me from truths that would have shattered me. Neither of them had loved me the way I'd needed, but they'd both loved me the way they could. I looked at Jennifer's phone number, still sitting there on my mother's letter. It was almost 6 o'clock, dinner time. She might be with her family, her children, my nieces or nephews I'd never met. I picked up my phone, put it down, picked it up again. What would I even say? Hi, I'm the sister you've known about for 30 years while I didn't know you existed. Thanks for keeping my mother's secrets. Sorry our father was a liar who ruined multiple lives. But then I thought about Jennifer at 17, brave enough to track down a father she thought was dead. Jennifer keeping those letters for me all these years. Jennifer calling my dying mother, asking about me, wanting to connect. Jennifer being patient while my mother found courage that never came. I dialed the number before I could talk myself out of it. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Maybe she wouldn't answer. Maybe this was a sign that... Hello? The voice was warm, slightly husky, real. My sister's voice. Hi, I said, and my voice cracked. Is this Jennifer? My name is Catherine. Catherine Hartwell. I think you've been waiting for me to call. There was a pause. Then I heard her breath catch. Catherine, she said, and she was crying. Oh my God, Catherine, yes, I've been waiting. I've been waiting for so long. I found my mother's letter, and the letters from our father. She died 3 days ago, and I just found everything." "I know," Jennifer said softly. "I saw the obituary. I almost came to the funeral, but I thought I didn't want to intrude. I didn't know if you knew about me yet." "I didn't. I didn't know anything. My whole life I thought I was alone." "You're not alone," Jennifer said, and her voice was fierce. "You're not alone. You never have been alone. You have me. You have Michael. You have 3 nieces and 2 nephews who've seen your picture and asked about you. You have family, Catherine, if you want us." I looked around my mother's kitchen, at the letter on the table, at the box of letters from a father who'd loved me from a distance, at the photograph of a happiness I couldn't remember, but could see right there in the frame, captured forever. "I want that," I said. "I really want that." "Then come to Oregon," Jennifer said. "Come meet us. Stay as long as you want. We have so much to talk about, so many years to catch up on." Oregon, where my father had hidden, where my sister had found him, where maybe, finally, I could stop running from the past and start building something new. "Okay," I said, "I'll come, after I finish settling my mother's estate, maybe in a few weeks." "Whenever you're ready," Jennifer said. "We'll be here. We're not going anywhere." We talked for another hour. She told me about her children, her husband, her life. I told her about my work, my apartment, my solitary existence that suddenly felt less like strength and more like just loneliness. We laughed, we cried, we made plans. When we finally hung up, the kitchen was completely dark, but I didn't feel alone anymore. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. I gathered up the letters, put them back in the blue metal box along with the photograph. I'd read them again. I'd share them with Jennifer and Michael. They were part of our story, part of the complicated web of love and lies that had brought us all to this moment. My mother's letter was still on the table. I picked it up, read the last line again. "I love you, Catherine." "I love you too, Mom. I forgive you, and I'm going to be okay. I'm going to have the family you were too scared to let me have. I'm going to be happy, just like Dad wanted, just like you wanted, even if you couldn't admit it." The snow had started again outside, gentle flakes drifting past the window. I thought about that letter my mother wrote before winter, knowing she wouldn't see another spring. She'd given me the truth when she couldn't face me. She'd given me family when she was about to leave me alone. In her own broken way, she'd set me free. I turned on the kitchen light, made myself tea in one of her old mugs, and sat down to start making lists. Estate lawyers to call,
Flights to book, a life to pack up, and a new one to start building. It would take time. It would be hard, but I wouldn't be doing it alone anymore. My mother had spent 50 years teaching me to stand on my own, and now, finally, I was ready to learn something new: how to let people in, how to be part of something bigger than myself, how to be loved and love back, without armor, without walls, without fear. Outside, winter was settling in, but inside, something was beginning to thaw.